We are breaking away now from the words of Andrew Gillum in that a hotly contested race for Florida governor. Now, as we have a recount in motion, the words from Andrew Gillum saying that he is replacing his words of concession with an unapologetic and uncompromised call to count every vote, not necessarily mentioning the president or the junior senator or the governor there, but saying that it is not democratic, not American to stop counting just because they don't like the direction, the way that the count is going. I want to bring in now Steve Schale. He is the former Florida state director for Barack Obama's 2008 presidential campaign. Also, Emily Tisch Sussman, a senior advisor at Swing Left and a former vice president at campaigns at the Center for American Progress. And also Rick Tyler, an MSNBC political analyst and Republican strategist. As we get started with you, Rick, your thoughts on the words that came out of Andrew Gillum here in basically saying, hey, yeah, I know I conceded the other day, but now I'm pulling it back.
Yeah, concessions don't matter. The legal vote counts, and he seems to be making a very reasoned call. Look, this should this is really very simple. This is all fits in the law. It's now within the margin of error, so there's been a recourt properly ordered, and that recount needs to be orderly and transparent. Protests don't help. Unsubstantiated claims of fraud don't help. What would help is if the county officials, especially in Broward County, would allow the press, particularly the wire services, to form a pool reporters to go in and to be able to observe the entire process. That should also apply to the state and national parties for these recounts, and also the lawyers for all the campaigns who are involved. Those are the people who should be involved. It should be a transparent process. Everybody should see exactly how the recounts in each of these counties are conducted, and then that should solve the problem. We don't need protesters. We don't need unsubstantiated claims of fraud. We need an orderly, transparent process.
Well, that process, as you just mentioned there, Rick, is going to come with the lawsuits, with the protests that we're seeing right now. So, Steve, I want to bring you in. Given that we have this deadline or this date of Thursday, the 15th, easier said than done, and having these machines recount these ballots. But with all this on the side, as we heard from Gillum saying, you know, we need to calm the violence, the heated racist rhetoric that's dividing this community. But again, the business at hand is to count and see who is going to get the wider margin and who is going to get that win, that check.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, Rick is exactly right. And this process is pretty easy at this point. I mean, you've got 8 million ballots. They'll run through the machines very orderly. They're going to separate out the votes that they can't count, either under votes, meaning that there's not a vote registering through the machine, or over votes where it looks like maybe they voted for 2 people. They'll separate those out. Thursday, if we're under a quarter point, they'll look at those by hand. And that process works pretty smoothly. It's the first time we've had a statewide recount in Florida, but we've done it a million times before for down ballot races. And Rick's exactly right. I mean, let this process play itself out. We don't need claims of fraud, that are unsubstantiated. We don't need people out there talking about ballots showing up that, wasn't true. The more we keep this thing on the level, the more confidence everybody's going to have in the eventual outcome.
Well, it's not that easy, as we've seen in the races outside of the governor's race, Emily. You have the Senate right here. We have Governor Scott suing Broward County, calling for the Florida Department of Law Enforcement to investigate. They ended up saying, we don't see anything. We don't find anything. So how is this process going to make its way, knowing that what can be called or considered as noise on the side with these unsubstantiated claims of fraud so far? And again, the people who are saying, you know what, let's just count. Let's be fair in this process.
Look, I think the thing that we're all dancing around is that the fact that it's been called unfair is coming from the president of the United States. He's worried in all of these races where there's still outcomes yet to be determined in Florida, in Georgia, in Arizona. It's starting from the president and it's moving through the Republican Party. Look, not counting votes and preventing people from voting is nothing new to the modern day Republican Party or even the Republican Party of the past. But the fact that it's coming from the president to try to cast doubt from the beginning of the process when votes haven't even all been counted already. They're not saying let's start over. They're saying let's count the votes that have already been voted. And the fact that he's trying to cast doubt on it from the beginning is really a huge problem. I think that what we've seen of who the people who have won in these races all over the country is that there is basically no Republican Party left except the party of Trump. And the fact that everyone is ready to stand behind him and get behind these calls from the beginning, I'm not surprised there's protests. I'm glad to hear that Rick and others think that it is not a good direction for people to go in. But this is basically what he's calling for. They're worried that the Democrat is going to fairly win an election, and so they're trying to cast doubt on it from the beginning.
Well, Rick, we've heard from the president. We know he is busy in France. He tweeted this afternoon trying to steal 2 big elections in Florida. We are watching closely. So how much pressure from the president, how might that add a different dynamic to this already complicated situation?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, the president has systematically tried to undermine institutions of our government, most notably the Justice Department. That has a substantial negative impact on people's trust in their institutions. And I think casting doubt on the elections process is potentially the worst thing you could do. If the people do not trust the elections process, then we are very close to anarchy. But as I say, and I don't think all Republicans believe that, are trying to cheat ballots, and Democrats, there's plenty of examples where Democrats have been accused of the same and vice versa. I don't think any of that's helpful. I think this is all under the law, and we can have a transparent process. We can have election observers duly appointed by the different campaigns, the parties, and have the press, which has a role here, to look and observe at the process and report it out. Mm-hmm. Now, there's clearly some incompetence going on in Broward and Miami-Dade County. Well, that happened in the 2000 election, but here in Broward in particular, they had not seemed to have solved their problems, and this is what causes people to have the excuse for going out and trying to undermine elections, because they can't seem to get the ballots counted in a timely way that gives people confidence in the process.
Yeah, we know the history there with Broward County, and Steve, I want to bring you in for that, just perspective. The debacle of 2000, the whole hanging chad, is it poked through, is it not? And here we are again, talking about Florida, and now we're beginning at the stages of this machine recount. How did we end up here?
Well, listen, it's frustrating. I'll agree with Rick. I mean, we lived this in 2000. Dade County's actually become a model. They learned their lesson from 2000, and frankly, some of the long lines we saw in 08 and 12, and they're now a model county. But Broward and Palm Beach continue to struggle. I was joking on Twitter that night that, I mean, they're as bad as a bad quarterback in the NFL when it comes to voting, counting votes. It's really ridiculous, and I hope that coming out of this process, the state is going to standardize some of these procedures. But Rick's right. I mean, the lack of transparency, particularly out of both Broward and Palm Beach, has created the space for some of these crazy conspiracy theories. It doesn't help that folks like Matt Gaetz and Lindsey Graham are jumping on them, but the reality is if they communicate a little better down there, we wouldn't have as many of these crazy ideas out floating around out there.
Yeah, and certainly keeping these people, as we're looking outside, from coming in, making their voices heard, making their messages known. Steve Scheel, Emily Tisch Sussman, and Rick Tyler, thank you so much for sticking around with me and digesting that. Thanks.
Thank you.